morning of May 24th, 2013, a 13-year-old Airbus A319 was taking off from London Heathrow to Oslo International Airport. The captain was 50 years old and had over 12,500 hours of flight experience, half of which were flown on Airbus aircraft. The first officer was 33 years old and had 5,000 hours of flight experience, 4,000 hours on the Airbus aircraft. As the first officer began the walk-around to inspect the aircraft, the captain began setting up the cockpit for the departure. As the first officer inspected the aircraft according to procedures, nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary, so he concluded his inspection and went back into the cockpit. At 8 o'clock, all 75 passengers were boarded and ready for their flight to Oslo. They pushed back from the gate from Terminal 5 on schedule. But, as they pushed back out of the gate, the pilots were still unaware what was to come. At 8:15 that morning, the aircraft was lined up and ready for departure. As the aircraft rolled down the runway, passengers observed out their windows the engine cowlings on the doors were swinging violently in the wind. The pilots had no indication of this and just continued as normal. Then, when the aircraft reached higher and higher speeds and rotated, the cowling on both engines ripped off into the wind and fell onto the tarmac. The first indication to the pilots that something was wrong is the autothrottle kept disconnecting. This means that the pilot flying, or the first officer, had to control the throttle manually instead of using the autopilot. Passengers reported visible damage of the engine to flight attendants. The flight attendants tried to contact the pilots via the intercom, but the pilots were too busy handling a different situation. On the aircraft's ECAM display showed a pile of messages on the aircraft's state. One of these warnings was that the engine could not calculate engine thrust because of one of the damaged computers within the engines. The instructions to get around this issue were to switch to N1 mode, which prevents the engines from doing something that could push their limits. The chief flight attendant observed out of one of the emergency exit rows and saw the piping for the aircraft's engines hanging and dangling. But the pilots were facing something worse. The yellow hydraulic system had lost its PSI, which means that the aircraft will not be able to use some spoilers, reverse thrust, and the flaps will lower significantly slower. To prevent more hydraulic systems from failing or leaking, the captain disabled the PTU pump. This is when the pilots radioed in to ATC that they would be returning to the airport because of engine problems and failed hydraulic systems. According to ATC, runways 27 left and 09 right have been shut down due to the debris that were scattered on the runway after they departed, so they'll have to be landing on runway 27 right. But worse problems kept emerging. The right engine had started gushing 1,200 kilograms of fuel per minute. The first officer observed the fuel imbalance in the right-hand engine and determined a fuel leak. The pilots were running out of time to assess the situation. The pilots had to land on runway 27 right immediately. Then, two flight attendants entered the cockpit and got a briefing from the captain on what to expect. He claimed that they would need to prepare for a likely evacuation on the runway. The first officer had calculated that in the last 2 minutes and 20 seconds, they had lost over 100 kilograms of fuel from the right fuel tank. According to the Quick Reference Handbook, it instructed to shut down the right engine. The first officer proposed this idea to the captain. This would lower the chances of an engine fire. But the captain disagreed, claiming that if the right engine was shut down, the left one could also suffer a failure, putting the aircraft into a deadly glide, which the captain said would be worse than an engine fire breaking out. Then, ATC cleared them to land on runway 27 right, and informed them that emergency services were waiting for them on the runway. They extended the flaps and prepared to land. the right-hand engine had rolled back and the aircraft rolled to the right. The captain reached to shut down the engine so it wouldn't cause any further problems, but Engine 2 was now on fire, and it was igniting the fuel that was leaking from it. The captain immediately discharged the first fire extinguisher, but the fire warning did not stop. Then, he discharged the second fire extinguisher, but the fire is still not extinguished. Now with one engine on fire, the captain held the throttle while the first officer guided the plane to the runway. At 500 feet, the captain took control of the aircraft. They came halting to a stop on the runway and evacuated on the left side of the aircraft, avoiding flames. Everyone on board the aircraft survived and evacuated accordingly. But now the real question is, how could such a thing happen with such an aircraft? The answer was found in the previous night, where the technicians had been working on the engines. The technicians were working on the engines when they realized that they were missing an important tool, so they went and got it. When they returned, they walked to the wrong aircraft and assumed that someone already finished the maintenance, because everything seemed to check out. They did not know that they left the cowling open on the previous aircraft. Mistakes sadly like this aren't that rare, but we're glad to hear that this vital mistake was corrected and realized without the loss of anyone's life. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, because we really appreciate the support.